In today's video, I want to discuss how I'm managing to raise my 3 kids trilingual. Hi, it's Anna here. Welcome back to my channel, the best place for parents or educators who want to learn and evolve with their children. A few weeks ago, one of you reached out to me on my Instagram account asking me for advice on how I am successfully raising my children trilingual. And for those of you who don't know, I'm obviously French, as you probably guessed from my accent. My partner is Russian and we live in Australia. When we had our first child, me and my partner had a full-on discussion about how we would go about it, because we were really committed to passing our respective languages down to them, and we wanted to make sure we were successful in doing so. So I ended up doing a lot of research on the topic. And I mentioned this up front because if passing down your language is very important to you, you need to be 100% committed, because it's not as easy as people think. But more on that later. First, I will debunk a few common myths that are unfortunately still so prevalent when it comes to raising bilingual or multilingual children. Then I will discuss the benefits of speaking different languages. And then I will discuss specific advice and especially what has worked for our family. So let's start with debunking a few myths first. The first myth is that bilingual children have speech delays. This one is particularly close to my heart because I cannot tell you the amount of people who told me that my kids would talk later. So, of course, I totally expected that to happen. But the truth is that all children, whether they are monolingual or bilingual, develop their language skills at different rates. So language development isn't linear, and speech delays has absolutely nothing to do with how many languages you speak. Studies have actually shown that bilingual children speak their first words within the normal age range, which is between 8 and 15 months old. And when they produce their first sentences, they develop grammar along the same timelines as monolingual children. In my personal experience, my first and third child were actually early talkers, and my second child was a late talker. She didn't actually talk much until she was 2.5 years old. So clearly, learning different languages doesn't have anything to do with speech delay. It's based on the own child's timeline. One thing that is true though, and that has been proven in recent studies, is that because our children were learning 3 languages at the same time, their overall vocabulary in one language, say French for example, was not as rich as a child who would only learn to speak French. Which makes sense because they were learning to say 3 different words for the same thing for every single object. So their overall vocabulary amount was the same, it's just that it was spread across 3 languages. And as they are growing, their vocabulary is expanding. The second myth is that bilingualism causes confusion. And unfortunately, I've seen this happen so many times with people I know who get told by family members or even their doctor that they should wait for their child to master one language first before speaking to them in their other language. And this is not only absolutely not true, but also the worst thing you can be doing, because the more you wait, the harder and more confusing it will be for your child. Really, the best time to start speaking your language to your child is from birth. Again, studies have shown that even when children have language difficulties in their primary language and they are exposed to a second language, it does not worsen their existing language difficulties. Children are actually very sensitive to sounds and can separate languages from a very early age. Studies have actually shown that babies can distinguish different languages in the womb. If you learn the language as an adult, you would know that for us, we need to take a very rational approach to learning, where we need to consider the grammar rules, the structure, and practice it so much to retain it. But what's so fascinating about young children, especially between birth and 3-year-olds, but really any child under 8, they absorb sounds, structures, intonation patterns, and rules of a second language very easily without giving it a conscious thought. One thing I'll add though is that you can totally expect your bilingual child to start mixing languages to start with. But it's completely normal and not a sign of confusion. It's just that they need a bit more time to sort the languages in their little brain. And in fact, it's actually common for even advanced bilingual adults to mix languages from time to time. The last myth is that raising children bilingual is easy. And I actually expected this to be easy because we hear this myth so often. And it's true that kids are sponges. They can learn and absorb different languages at an early age, and it's so much easier for them than for adults. But if you want to raise children who have a level of fluency in the languages, It takes so much hard work, patience, and consistency. And if you don't accept that it's going to take hard work and dedication, I've seen it happen with so many of my friends where their toddler and their child understand everything that they're saying in their language, but they respond in English. And it's totally possible to revert this, but again, it takes so much commitment and patience. And I will discuss some examples that we've gone through later on in this video. And of course, it will happen from time to time. For us, we live in Australia, so English will always be the dominant language. It is the community language, but you can still work at it, and I will provide more advice on this later. Now, before I get into specific advice, I wanted to discuss the benefits of speaking different languages. And this is if you need to be convinced of the benefits of raising your children bilingual, or simply if you need ammunition when talking to family members. And these benefits have been scientifically proven with multiple studies. The first benefit is that learning multiple languages as a child has been proven to improve brain function. Studies have actually shown that children raised multilingual use both hemispheres of the brain when using their languages, whereas people who learn a language in adulthood mainly use one hemisphere. So they have also shown higher density of brain matter, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which leads to better executive function, so improved attention, problem-solving skills, and memory. So this is largely because of the workout our brain receives while switching back and forth between one language and another when deciding how to communicate. So knowing different languages doesn't necessarily make you smarter, but it does make your brain more healthy, complex, and sharp. And the second benefit is related to the healthier brain, is that it has been proven to delay Alzheimer and dementia. Another benefit is that it makes you more open-minded, it allows you to see the world in a different perspective, it improves your social life. Speaking a second language opens up a whole new range of social opportunities and can really enhance your social skills and confidence. The more languages you understand, the more people you can converse with and the more meaningful those relationships can be. Another one is cultural benefits. When passing your language to your child, it will be easier to pass your culture down to them as well. And it will help them understand themselves and their roots so much better. There are so many career benefits as well. I mean, this one is self-explanatory. Our world is so fast changing, we really don't know what kind of jobs will exist for our children in 20 years' time. So them speaking several languages can only be an advantage when they will be looking for a job. It also makes travel easier and more enjoyable because you can speak the language. And lastly, when you know 2 languages, learning a third becomes so much easier. So now I wanted to end this video with practical advice on how we are successfully raising our children trilingual. And the first thing I want to mention is that we are using a method called OPAL, which stands for One Parent, One Language. And personally, we have found this method to be so much easier and less confusing for all of us, for children, but also for us parents, because it's one simple rule. So in our case, it's you speak to mom in French and you speak to dad in Russian. And it really helps me as well because it's too confusing for me if I had to switch between different languages. It helps me to compartmentalize how I speak to my children. So I speak to other people in English, but my children only in French. So it helps both children and parents. And as mentioned before, as your baby becomes a toddler, he will most likely mix the languages and speak to you in the other language. And my recommendation here is to correct him. But you shouldn't do it in a negative way. You should still make it fun and positive so it doesn't become a tedious process. So for example, if my child said the word apple to me in Russian or English, I would say something like, yes, that's very good. In mommy's language, we say pomme. And as they grew older and I knew that they knew the word, instead of giving them the word every time, I would say something like, how do you say it in mommy's language? And give them time to actually come up with the word. And that's what I meant earlier when I said that raising multilingual children is not easy. It can be so tiring to constantly reinforce our language, but it is such a crucial component of raising children who are truly bilingual. And as children grow older and go to school, they will speak to you in the community language from time to time. It will be the dominant language. My children do this from time to time. They go through phases where they will be speaking to me in English, especially when they're telling me a story that happened at school. But it's so important to keep going and not give up. To give you a specific example, I took my first child to France for 2 months when she was 3 years old. And when we came back, she would no longer speak to her dad in Russian. She would understand everything he was saying, but she would only respond in French. And he persevered and he worked at it and he corrected her and he made it fun. And it took him, I'm not joking, it took him 4 weeks of perseverance. But it turned the corner and it really paid off, because the outcome is that now she's 7 years old and they can have a full-on conversation in Russian. It's amazing. Now, I know situations where one parent has 2 languages that they want to pass down. And my recommendation here is to do a bit of trial and error to see what works for you. Maybe you can speak one language one day, another language another day, or maybe structure it with different activities. So for example, bedtime stories are in one language and dinner time is another language. You will need to experiment with it a bit to see what works for you guys. My second piece of advice is that when raising children multilingual, it's so important to make the minority language or languages relevant. Your child really needs to feel that these languages are useful and not just a weird language that mom or dad speaks. So what I've found is that watching cartoons and reading books is the best way to do that. So in our case, we don't have any books in English at home. We only have books in French and Russian. And we try as much as possible to make them watch cartoons in our language. And it's so easy to do that with YouTube or the internet these days. But also really try to find families in your local community who have children of similar ages and who speak your minority language. Because when it becomes a language of play, it becomes so much more relevant for our children. And of course, it's very important to take trips back home when possible. I mean, obviously with coronavirus, we haven't been able to do it ourselves. The international borders in Australia are still closed, but I'm really hoping to do that in the next few years. So maybe every 3 years, trying to take my kids back for a month or 2 just to brush up on the vocabulary. And it's such an important piece of the puzzle because when they are fully immersed, it becomes so much easier for us parents and for them as well, because it's completely natural and happens so fast with minimal input from us. Also, in our case, we were very lucky to be able to find a public school that is bilingual. So my kids are actually learning English and French at their schools. And we've also enrolled them in a Russian school on Saturdays. But try to see if you can find even playgroups in your local community. I've seen so many of them in Sydney, like little playgroups with different languages. Or even try to organize one yourself if you can find different families. And lastly, try to Skype your family as much as possible so they can talk to your children in that minority language and really create a bond and a relationship with that language. So like I said, raising children multilingual is definitely hard work, and it takes so much commitment, perseverance, and patience. But honestly, it's so worth it. My 7 and 5-year-old are officially trilingual and they can so easily switch from one language to another. It has been so fascinating to watch them grow and evolve with these languages. And there are so many amazing moments, like when they are having a conversation with their dad in Russian and I come in the room and they turn to me and tell me what they were talking about in French. It's been so amazing to watch them. That's it for today. If you have enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and please leave me a comment and introduce yourself. I'd love to know what languages you are passing down to your children. Thanks for watching and keep growing.